So number 5 is an interesting one because this isn't one people say to us. This is something we see in practice all the time. And the myth or the misunderstanding is that you can teach self-reg with a one-size-fits-all approach. We do. We see it in practice all the time. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's why people love programs.
Yeah.
Program is the classic one-size-fits-all. And unfortunately, it's like, going to the department store and, buying a suit off the rack. And the department clerk comes up to you and says, well, if you just sort of hunch your shoulder up like this and suck in your gut, and if you walk like this, it fits perfect. So the story is really every child is different. Every teacher is different, every class is different, and constantly changing, constantly. And you made a great point in our last section about how, self-reg involves this dance, with two partners. It's a dance in which the music's always changing, in which the rhythm's always changing, the tempo picks up, slows down. So no, one size doesn't fit all.
And when people hear that, because we've heard that term's been around for a long time, especially, I did a lot of work in inclusion, so we would talk about one size doesn't fit all. And people hear that. Some people hear that, and I would say these are our self-reggers and our natural self-reggers, and they understand that, and it's not overwhelming to them. Other people hear that, and they think you mean 30 separate programs for, 30 IEPs or IPPs, whatever you call them where you live, and that's not really what it is at all. I think that one of the reasons this is so stressful actually for some, well, there's two. One is that they think in terms of what works for them. So somebody who loves to meditate thinks everybody needs to meditate, or loves yoga and thinks everybody needs yoga without realizing that it can be over. So that's one of the issues, thinking that what works for you is what works for everyone. But the other one is our system. And I realize that as I put that out there, these are hard things to bust the way that it's always been done. Even this idea, Ken Robinson talks about us moving through classes and batches and all these sorts of things. But we've come to know that schooling is done like this in a one-size-fits-all, or 3 groups. You're group A, you're group B, you're group, and instead of having it be, I think I'm going to say more child-centric, more around the student, and in a way that's actually not. I don't find that overwhelming, but some people truly do.
So how do you respond to that teacher who is anxious about, thinking I have to have, 25 separate plans?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think, first of all, is dispelling that myth. We often get asked for examples of what that might look like, and we're trying to build on those. But my gut instinct is to go to her stress, right? Her self-reg and helping, because I think that if you truly feel it's 25 separate questions, that's stressful on anybody, and no wonder they're overwhelmed. But I think if you live self-reg yourself and start to sort of focus on your own personal self-reg and recognize that that's a stressor for you, and unpack what all the stressors involved in that are, because once you live it, you start to, it's like you see everything else differently afterwards.
So let me ask you a question.
This wasn't supposed to turn to me.
No, but it's something I've wondered about. And I've wondered if that very question, how am I supposed to do this when I've got so many kids, et cetera. I've wondered, is that itself one of the results, the products of a self-control mindset? The thinking that self-regulation, I have to be in control of this child.
Yeah.
And that if they can, so it is.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think it's actually connected to one of the other myths in here, which is about this is another replacement for classroom management.
Yes.
So the reason it's scary to let go of classroom management is because people are afraid heck is going to break loose, and we're taking another without them at the controlling it, and it just doesn't work that way.
So is it fair to say, because my experience is so limited compared to yours, well, non-existent compared to yours, when I look at those classrooms that really do strike me as doing this well, it's going really, really well, one of the things they seem to have in common is that the teacher does spend time with the group explaining, the ideas of self-reg, but that the kids themselves, at any age, are remarkably proactive in knowing what will be calming for them, what will help them be in the sorts of states that well, calmly focused and alert. If you give them that opportunity, so you do have to explain stuff, and you do have to step in when necessary. But it turns out in a good self-reg class, it's really not very much.
And this would be a good study, because I think you can only speak from my own experience, and there's different ways of looking at things, and I think what you're saying there is valid for sure. But there's also, well, in fairness to the teachers, part of it is the pressures are on them to have a whole lot of different and there's lots of paperwork and meetings and these things that can be involved.
Good point.
But I think one of the big differences is what your definition of curriculum. And there's debate about this in the field. I like the definition of it as both what's planned and what's lived. So to me, you do have to do some planning, and you have to do some good instructional design and all of those sorts of things. But I also think of curriculum as, how a kid walks in the door, or, what happens in the day, and, a bee gets into your classroom, or, it depends on the grades, right? So, and so that if you're thinking of it, like I like the idea of living it as a family, and I think that's what you're talking about.
That's great.
And so whatever happens, you sit down and you talk it through and you work it through.
I was thinking of that little insert that you had that you showed me the other day about the family rules.
Yes.
And you just reminded me there's another myth here.
Yeah.
And the other myth here is that we actually know what all the myths are.
Yeah, we know a lot of them. Well, and a lot of teachers feel they get distracted from curriculum without realizing, and in the high school years it's even harder because it is more structured, but you're afraid you can't get to all of your things instead of realizing, personally I always used to say that if a meteor lands in your backyard this afternoon and you don't have the flexibility to go and study that meteor and turn it, then there's something about the approach to curriculum, because I could get every math outcome I'm trying to do, every science, and you can get self-regulation is just embedded right in it, but it's how you work through things, right? And it's the other piece on it too, in terms of time, it does take a lot of time, Stuart, and that's something that we can't deny. But truly, it's your front end time. You invest in the relationships, you invest in the working through, you invest in
that's what I was
and
wondering.
the front end, and then it will make your year so much better. And you're going to have these moments, and but if you look at all of that as it's part of the curriculum. It really is. It's part of the learning, and it's the biggest gift you can give to kids, but also right back at yourself.
So I have a feeling you just crystallized what SEL, social emotional learning, is all about.
Maybe.